The idea of Lenin was to construct an analogy to the existing system of society, its hierarchical power, and an apparatus to break it. So you'd have to have, this was his idea, a similar hierarchical structure, but designed to smash that state. Now let's assume that there was such a hierarchical power structure with 20 people at the top in America, 20 families at the top, let's say within them 20 male household leaders, and then within them like 3 or 4 people who are the sort of council of the 20, because if you've got 20, I mean I was on the Central Committee in Britain, if you've got 20, the tide can turn. Even though you've got long-standing authority, for example, I moved the vote to remove some people, or better said, I've discussed with some people to remove a vote to remove some people, all of a sudden we had a majority, by chance. Some people were missing from the meeting, other people were there, you know, there was a critical mood, there were some people who, one person we had was suddenly being praised so much, and the next minute he moved the resolution to change the leadership. And so in that way, all sorts of conspiracies can develop within a conspiracy. So even if you had an ideal structure of hierarchical power, where you had a common interest, I mean, common interest in revolution is more common than your common interest in making money. You sit 5 people together, you know, look, we've done a business together, right? You sit 5 people together and we discuss, okay, let's do this business, let's do that business. Of course you sit there and you think, well, but I could do my business could do that, and then someone else, my business could do it. And then like all of a sudden you've got 7 people arguing about what their business would do instead of what that single business would do. And so that's always the case under capitalism. Now there may be some people who sit down and say, well, you and I, we know the way this should operate. And you sit there and you discuss it out and you work out and you've got the same philosophy, you came from the same school. That's why actually these coalitions form, because the Chinese, they used to say, as a phrase, if 3 mouths speak as one, you can turn the world to gold. So when you can get people agreeing on what they're saying and propagating those views, then you have a powerful force. I mean, you know that Christianity, you know, you have a concept, the Bible, a belief system. It enables you to go to the outside world and seek out commonality with other people. Well, you know, political activists or political leadership from the economic sphere or from powerful historical families or whatever, they may have a certain amount of that, and they'll form into groups like Skull and Bones and the Bullingdon Club, and so you'll see, you can draw threads and connections and say, David Cameron, look, there's a picture of Nick Clegg, David Cameron and whoever, all in the same club at the same university at the same time. It's a conspiracy. But then, if you actually sit in the cabinet office and you hear them, and then you put a bug in their house and you hear how one's attacking the other. Look at this, a Gordon Brown story with Tony Blair. You know, there they were, the allies who united to control Labour. Thereafter, they were fighting each other like cats in a bag, like dogs in a bag. So,
I mean, I wish it was as normal as that. I don't believe that. I think that the people who are, and they haven't got a hierarchy and they're just sitting there, they're behind the scenes, the secret government, I think that they have a very different kind of rationale of just divide and conquer, destroy, deindustrialise, reduce the population from 7.5 billion slowly but surely, and take our power away without any more hassle than they want. And they also want to reveal that they're doing this ahead of time because they're very deeply religious people who believe that they get power out of our compliance. I think those people work on a very different rationale.
How would you explain, according to that theoretical framework, how would you explain something like the People's Republic of China? Are they part of this?
A bit of both. Some of them are part of it, and some of them are not. So there's definitely a battle there. And China's their model. So the New World Order, the globalist model. They like the way the Chinese run their country. That's how they would like to run the world as a New World Order. But the chances, there's always a danger that China would double cross them and have an alliance with Russia, who are certainly much less in with them than not. Russia are nationalist in the sense they want people to have children, they want their country to grow, and they aren't as standing by at some level with Iran and Syria, which are the last three blocks, you know, the things between them and their New World Order at one level. But people and guns in America and a few other things.
Was precisely, in my view, the last few weeks, someone's come up to me a few minutes ago and said, things are changing very fast, aren't they? It's true. I mean, the front page of the Economist, it's not everything, but it's significant. This week is the wounded West, and I think that's true. I mean, really, they've taken a battering. They've taken a battering, not because the members of Parliament have got a conscience, or because Russia's so clever, but because the internal cohesion gradually whittles away inside the structures of power that exist. And there are many, as I would say, many such conspiratorial groupings with different layers of leadership within them, who you could say, and I agree, they form a coherent ruling class in some way or another. The general policies, for example, of austerity as against expansionism, which is the general phenomena in Western Europe and America. And that's where there's a tenuous link between what you're saying with China, for example, because China and Russia have got quite different interests. The Russian elite, who in theory were about to capitulate to America, well, when Putin came to power, that changed. I mean, Putin is no poodle of the West, and the Chinese certainly are.
What do you think he wants? Really,
He wants a re-establishment of the internal authority of the ruling elite in Russia, which part of which is to establish international prestige for Russia, which includes Russian spheres of influence have historically been related to countries that used to be former Soviet satellite states and ex-colonial states that used to have quite good relations with Russia, as Syria, Egypt, and so on. And therefore, they hope that these elite backgrounds of some of these people will remember this type of thing and think that this is a nationalist question against,
so you think he wants personal power?
Well, I mean, he's already got a lot of personal power.
Yeah, I know,
but there's no doubt about it that Putin's prestige inside Russia has gone up enormously in the last 2 weeks, right? Here it is. Russia has been defeated one time after another since the Cold War, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And all of a sudden, Putin's pulling the shots.
I think Putin doesn't want to capitulate with the globalists unless he absolutely has to, and he will have to do a deal with China to beat them if he has to. But he has to stand up from where he's at, or he has to go in with them, and then he's got to try and do a deal with New World Order. But when you say about the West has been blooded, it's sure that there are elite, the generals probably, who've stood up and said to Obama, you can't do this, you mustn't do this, or whatever. There's some hierarchical what's the word? Attacking Obama and the globalists who are behind him. But ultimately, America have self-bloodied their nose time and time again. They deindustrialized over the last many years, putting a lot of their work over to China that they didn't need to. Going into these wars, they know the consequences. They're not stupid. They're not stupid. So they know that it's bloodying. They're bloodying their nose. So yeah, they want to destroy America at some level or take away its power. That's why they're fighting to take away the guns. That's why they are fighting to take away the money in America. They themselves want to control America, and they want to control everywhere they are, but they don't care about America as a place and a people.
One of your propositions was
yes,
they want to deindustrialise America.
They have been.
They have been deindustrialised America.
Yes, correct.
Is there less industrial production now than 25 years ago?
I would imagine there's not.
Right, there isn't. There's not less industrial production. Britain's the same, actually. Even though Thatcher was called a deindustrialiser, Britain still produces as much as it did in manufacturing as it did in 1979. Right?
Well,
all that happened was they reduced the workforce,
right,
and certain types of employment shifted towards China. For example, the manufacture of iPhones and so on. The Chinese themselves don't produce the components going into most of these machines. What they do is the Chinese put them together. So you have large numbers of workers. For example, in Shenzhen, there's a factory with 400,000 Chinese workers working for Foxconn's producing for iPad and iPhone and Apple and so on. They have 400,000 workers on assembly lines, basically doing the same type of operations as people did here in the 1920s or the 1870s. Right? So it's the pattern of industrialization. Why? Because advanced capitalist countries have got high intensity of capital.
The government pay billions to ship General Motors and companies over to China, and they support that kind of activity, and that they have an interest in ensuring that they themselves have power. They want to have power over their people, because it's not the American government that are causing all of the troubles as far as people like me are concerned. It's the people behind the American government who use the American government. So they don't actually care about America. In fact, they want to destroy America, at least to the point where those people are in some form of abject poverty sufficient that they can run them as a slave colony.
If you say they want to destroy America,
Yep.
and then you also say they don't care about America, the two arguments are contradictory.
No, they care enough to want to...
They care about destroying it, you're saying?
Yeah, they
right?
care about deindustrialising it, which I believe they're doing, even though you're saying that it's a different kind of industry. And the levels of poverty in America are exponentially...
Per capita machinery and equipment in America, compared with per capita machinery and equipment in China, is just astronomically higher in America.
I'm sure it is.
Right? And that's their advantage. That's what they rely upon as a state. Now, in terms of internal cohesion, now there are people in America, because it's the philosophy of the American dream and the American political economy historically, was their philosophy was based upon extreme inequalities as a justified ideology. In other words, their regime is based upon the gambling casino psychology. So we must have a free market where everyone can make money, and those at the bottom land up at the bottom. But on the other side, the tendency why Obama was elected was because he was promising healthcare and so on to the poorest layers of society. Now, they didn't provide what they offered, but that was a pressure within society which to some degree has to be ameliorated. Now, of all the countries like Western Europe and China, the Americans did spend quite a bit on infrastructure in the last few years. They did spend quite a lot. They have, however, a long-standing internal battle, which is that they don't have a mass social democratic force which defends welfarism. And the consequence, or how supports welfarism, the consequence of that is that America has slightly different characteristics historically as a capitalist system than, for example, Western Europe. I mean, even the Conservatives in Britain, the only way they get away with their attacks on the national health is by saying they're actually defending the national health, right? Nobody turns around in Britain and says we're going to smash the national health. It's the leftists who turn around and say they are smashing the national health, and the Conservatives say we're not, it's safe with us, all we're doing is changing and reducing the bureaucracy. Right? So the arguments are in a different paradigm in Britain than they are in America. But that doesn't mean, although on the one side it does mean that the ruling elite in America have more autonomy from political interference, from the masses, from the trade unions, from social democracy, welfarism, than the governments of Europe do.
Yeah.
When they try to do reform in Greece, for example, there's been like 15 general strikes in Greece in the last 2 years. Chancellor Merkel, she'll probably be elected today again. She wants to implement cuts upon the Greeks, but at the same time, every time there are warnings from within the establishment in Germany which say, push too hard and you'll have a fascist government in Greece. Or push too hard and you'll have a communist government in Greece. And so, at what point do they suddenly retract and turn around and say, we're not going to do that? And actually, funny enough, I think it's the candidate standing against Merkel is, I think his name is Steinbrücker, if I'm not wrong. Steinbrücker. He turned around last week and he saw the way things were going, and he shifted his arguments and said, we shouldn't treat the Greeks so badly, we should invest money in them. All the arguments which have been unpopular, he's suddenly positioning himself in that direction. Look at Ed Miliband, the same thing this week. Ed Miliband suddenly, actually started with the war thing, suddenly Ed Miliband is profiling to the left. Right?
Repeal of the bedroom tax.
Yes, he turned around. What did he do? In order to profile to the left, he thinks, who's the leftist in London? Heiko, Khoo. So what does he do? He says, I'm going to go to Brighton, I'm going to stand on a platform, and I'm going to speak. Okay, use the microphone, I don't. I'm going to speak to people and look like a soapbox orator. traditional labour. That's what he did, right?
Good for John Major.
It worked for John Major. Well, that's right. But do they listen to me? Do they? Heck, you know.
But the
How long did it take the idiot?
It's
It's taken him a while, though, isn't it?
The fundamental difference with myself and yourself is that I don't see it as capitalism, even in the shape and form. I just don't see what goes on most of the time as capitalism in any sense of the word. But also, you
so
speak
what
of
systemic form operates?
whatever, because it's so rigged and so that there's the normal sense of capitalism is not at work.
Right,
but the other
right.
thing is that you talk about the elite in America, and I think that the elite that I'm talking about are not in America. They might influence America and even physically sit there some of the time, but they are globalists. They don't have an interest in America. They don't care about anything but themselves and their ruling ideology, which is that they're transhumanists, they're eugenicists, and they're determined to take this world into a new phase and to reduce our population, experiment on us, and to use us in their grand experiment for the next phase. And that's who is seeking to run the world. Now, I'm not saying they're going to get away with it necessarily, and I'm not saying that they necessarily comfortably run the world without battling elites within and around them. And they could themselves be taken over by another elite, possibly. But for 200 years, these people have been at it, in shapes and forms, in family heritage, interbreeding. They've been at it. And it's fairly well documented to, I think, not a particularly disputable manner. I mean, if you try and dispute it, fine, but I've heard nobody really be able to do that. I think what happens is that yourselves and folk like yourself talk more from the state versus the state, region versus the region, and there's other people like me who talk about the people behind the Anglo-American alliance going way back through the East India Company, and these are the people that have worked out how to manipulate capital, how to manipulate state, and how to manipulate to some degree and as far as possible the left. And these are the people that need to be identified, whether we name the 20 companies or less. And it's nothing like 200. You know, some people say 13. The Council of Rome, these groups, these subgroups that themselves these people are made up of, these are the people who are interested in going to Syria and putting the pressure behind Obama, Haig and all that, and whatever's over those people.
Why did they fail then?
Pardon?
Why did they fail?
Well, yeah, I give you that. They have, but they said that they were going to do this. You know, there's that famous article by Seymour Hersh wrote the famous article Reconstruction.
Let's take one scenario.
They've had themselves knocked back. But let's just see whether they can get away with it and how far they are to go.
Let's take one scenario then.
Right.
Just one scenario.
Right.
Let's assume that 20 people,
20 families.
20 families had a universal global plan to
Yes.
bring about X, Y, Z.
Yeah. The Illuminati.
But which included, well, it doesn't matter what their name is, does it?
No.
Rose by any other name.
Yeah, whatever.
Let's assume then that one of their components was conquer Syria, you know, smash the regime, take on Iran, do so on, you know.
Balkanise the area.
A plan for what they would do in the region. However, it goes wrong.
Yep, that's gone.
What happens when 20 people have a common plan and something goes wrong with it? When their next meeting happens, what do?
You tell me, what do you think?
They fight each other.
I'm
They
sure there is-
apportion blame, they fight each other,
Sure.
and they reorganize and realign the leadership. Now, maybe they've got a self-enclosed 20 people, I don't know. But I can tell you this, I've worked, like I say, in groups that are supposed to be revolutionary organizations to bring about change with one idea and concept about what that change will be.
yeah.
And yet, although I worked with those people for 30 years, and they kept a relatively monolithic theoretical framework throughout that 30 years, and tactical and strategic policy. Still, when the shit hit the fan and we disagreed on something, the whole thing broke apart, you know, across the entire world.
So what happens if you yourselves were the bankers behind the bankers, this
Well,
lot?
exactly.
No, supposing
It'd be
you
even
though,
more into
supposing
this
you
side.
though, in your failure, if you failed to do this, would possibly be brought to court and possibly, you know, executed or put in prison for the rest of your life. What would change? How would that change the dynamic in terms of continuing on in your
Let me
particular?
give you another example. Just this morning, I believe it was announced that the former leader of Chongqing, a man by the name of Bo Xilai, it's the headline of the news on the BBC
What's
today.
Chongqing again?
Chongqing's the biggest urban conurbation in the world. It's part of China.
Oh, right, okay.
And this guy Bo Xilai was on the news recently.
Yeah.
He was done for corruption. He's been sent to prison now today for life.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
only a year and a half ago, he was tipped to become the leader of China. right? Which according to some surveys now says is the #1 manufacturer in the world.
Right.
Right? Almost nobody denies that China will be the #1 producer in the world within 10 years. Almost, I don't think anybody denies that. Right? So, and here we have, some people say, a combination of the political centralization of the type that I was talking about a little while ago, Marxism, Leninism, democratic centralism, political ideology, Marxist theory, guiding their action, at least in theory.
Yeah.
At the same time as you've got a business elite associated around it, very tight-knit business elite who they're connected with as well. So here you really have a conspiratorial group, which can be called the Central Committee, the Politburo,
open.
you know, and an 18 million strong party.
Yep.
Right? So there you have, what, if the world was controlled by people like this, then you could really turn around and say, here we've got a group of people who run the world. That would really be the case. Because the group of people in China, they do run China. I don't think there's any doubt about that. In America and in Britain, that isn't the case. It isn't the case. Now, it's an interesting argument because one of the strengths of the West is the fact that it isn't the case. And the weakness of China is the fact that it is the case. Right? Because like in Egypt or in Tunisia or in Saudi Arabia or in China, where you have a tight-knit elite who control the political process through dictatorial means, you have a target to overthrow, which is far smaller and simpler to overthrow than a system that as soon as, let's say if I come for you, oh, Mark was to blame for that. Let's grab him, you know, turn on the witch. So the whole, you know, the people take to the streets and say, down with Mark, right? Next second, you're gone. Who's to come next? If you're gone and you've got a tight-knit dictatorship, well, then we've got nothing to replace you with. Who knows what will happen? On the other side, if you're gone and the other guy turns around and says, I always told you he was a load of crap, join my party, let's have a vote. You know, then we have a vote, we've got him elected, you're out, same game going on, but you're out the window. Different face, slightly different appearance, slightly different policies, let's give them a try. You know, and in that way, the system of Western democracy is more stable than the system of dictatorship. Now, the argument, however, is that that's my opinion. The argument, however, is that the Chinese Communist Party is an exception to that. That it hasn't fallen in the Jasmine revolutions. Remember a couple of years ago when Egypt went, the newspapers in England were full of stuff, China's going to go any day. Someone's called for Jasmine revolution at McDonald's, and there's going to be a revolution in China. Actually, there were 50 American reporters at McDonald's, one demonstrator, taken away straight away, and that was it. So there was no Jasmine revolution, but some people said there would be. What's the internal unity in China? The internal unity is based upon economic growth. There's a very powerful economic growth that maintains the benefits to the people. If the people don't benefit, the government will fall.
Yeah, but
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
But I think the secret shadow government, though they haven't got the interest in people like you're saying that elite has, they themselves operate in exactly the same way. But except what they do is expose, you know, fight whistleblowers, fight people who want to stand up, and they do things, you know, subversively behind the scenes. But they operate in exactly the same dictatorial way. The other thing is, I just read the other day, I didn't realise that Indonesia there's been people getting caught for corruption over there, and it shows a similar model in that respect, apparently, that there's been a number of people being brought to court, you know, to court there and fined and imprisoned and all this sort of stuff. But I don't see it like you. I still think that you still are looking at Obama and there's too much of the surface, and you've got to look behind the scenes to not even the business world, but to the very, very elite of the business world, who I would say are operating exactly the same dictatorial fashion, and they are not fighting China. They're standing with China to try and do a deal with them, and it's whether they'll succeed in doing that or not, whether they have to fight China. But they'll be happy if China. They'll be happy. They'll be happy for China to destroy America.
I'm trying to explain, trying to make it clear,
right,
what the differences are in this type of viewpoint. That's
sure.
all. I'm not trying
No, I appreciate that.
So one of the things I would say to that would be this. one of the fundamental differences between Marxism as an approach to these questions and the method you're adopting is that Marxism doesn't say this individual is doing X, Y, and Z, although they may be. It says this individual does X, Y, and Z, like you said, behind the scenes. Obama does something because behind the scenes there is a group of people telling him what to do.
Well,
Right, roughly.
Yeah.
What Marxists say, or Marxism as a methodology says, is that not that behind the scenes of Obama a group of people decides what to do, although they may. The question is, they do their actions because they themselves are compelled by their circumstance. So, just for example, as if you go to McDonald's or Pret-a-Manger or the Speaker's Corner Cafe, and you go and look at the way in which the relationship exists between the supervisor, the manager, and the worker, and you will notice a pattern of behavior that if you take them outside of that, if they weren't in that environment, if they were living in a quiet village in Guatemala by the beach, picking bananas and fishing for fish, those relationships between them would not look like they do. So there's a structure of relationships created precisely because McDonald's, Pret-a-Manger, and the Speaker's Corner Cafe are operating in a very specific economic environment where very specific patterns of behavior are imposed upon the actors within it. Tomorrow, you could sack all the workers in Pret-a-Manger there, McDonald's there, and Speaker's Corner here. And all the managers. Bring in an entirely new set. And within 2 months, they'll be behaving the same way. So, the point I'm saying is, there is an automatic process within the system that gives people what Marx called a character mask. They adopt a form of behaviour associated with a system.
That was the Speaker's Corner show for this week. Come down and visit us at Speaker's Corner any Sunday afternoon. Tune in at 6 p.m. on 104.4 Resonance FM or visit our website speakerscorner.net.